You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/Into the Portal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And welcome all into the season of fall. Woohoo! We hit September.
We finally made it.
We did, yeah. This was a strange summer, to say the least.
Yeah.
We celebrated in all the ways that we could. Just celebrating the little things, I guess.
And for us, September is really the start of the Halloween season because we're heading into fall. It's like Christmas time for other people, you know what I mean? Where it starts in July. But no, we're excited about fall. Really stoked.
Yeah, basically our favorite season. We know that is quite the cliche, but we're going with it.
Sure. It is a cliche in paranormal podcasting, I would say.
I won't deny myself.
No.
But to celebrate, we do want to put out some extra content. And so we decided to release 2 of our favorite episodes from our Patreon vault. So our exclusive vault from times past. It's been going. We've had this going for a couple years now. So there's a lot of fun stuff up there. And we just handpicked 2 to share with all of our listeners.
Yeah. So you guys can get a taste of what we're doing over there. And we encourage you to go check it out. We have a really, really sweet community. So hop on over there. The link is in the show notes below and you can see everything we do on patreon.com. It is the best way, if not, it's the best way to support the show. And we really appreciate it. So go check that out. A couple more things on Patreon. We have some send outs on the way for our patrons, our new patrons. And we just wanted to give a massive shout out to Molly for joining the community there. So thank you, Molly. Really appreciate
you so
that.
much.
And another big thing, we finally got some merch, don't we, Amber?
Finally.
Kind of, it took us a hot sec to get there. We kind of hummed and hawed over the years, but you know what, guys? Thanks to Amber here, we finally have some really cool designs, and this is another amazing way to support the show. So this link is in our all-encompassing ITP link in the show notes, and it's really cool, you guys. We got some UFO designs up there. We got a really epic ITP icon design in red and blue, I believe. But anyway, it's awesome.
Well, we've got 2 versions of it. One's like a printed version. The other is actually an embroidered, so it's like stitched right on like the little breast pocket area. Really neat. I've had a lot of fun designing those. And you can find them all at, our website, Into the Portal. You can browse the collection and basically the link to our Etsy shop's on there too.
Totally.
So, yeah.
And I will say as well, just to remind everybody that all of our epic paranormal stickers have free shipping. So go check that out as well. Yeah.
Right. Now's the time. Limited edition, folks.
And without further ado, let's get into the legendary monster, the Kongamato. Throughout the continent of Africa, there are particular stories of creatures that are simply not from this time. Beasts like Mekele Mbembe in the Congo, lurking in the rivers connecting the dense Congolian jungle and Cameroon. But when it comes to flying beasts, there is another monster whose origins and home are unknown. A creature known as the Kongamato. Massive, unidentified flying entities that to most resemble the likes of a giant pterosaur. Its leathery red and black skin is said to be nearly impenetrable, although few have gotten close enough and lived to actually tell the tale. But where exactly these creatures reside is still unknown, with most Western researchers believing the Kongamato is nothing more than a cautionary tale. Avoiding the swamps of Zambia or the mountain caves of other states. We may not know the true home of this cryptid creature, but one thing is for sure, people have certainly encountered them. So join us on Into the Portal for a Patreon exclusive episode as we search for the legendary Kongamato.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
Welcome, patrons. Good to have you.
Yeah, what's up, everybody?
Yeah, it's a brand new month. We're heading into spring, thank God.
Hopefully.
Yes,
It
February.
might snow again. You never
Even
know.
though it's like the shortest month, it feels like the longest month in my mind, usually.
Extra day this time around.
Even though it is the month of love, supposedly.
That's what they say.
She says, dripping with cynicism.
I feel like next year we'll definitely have to cover some sort of Valentine's Day massacre or something. Or we talked about that.
Yeah.
We joked about covering that this year. I never.
Or no, just myths about St. Valentine's. If anyone has any cool ones, throw them at us. It'd be fun. We want to do something weird for next Halloween. Or next Halloween.
Definitely next
Next
Halloween.
Valentine's.
We're going to make Valentine's more like a Halloween next Valentine's.
Yes. Speaking of Valentine's, obviously February has come and gone, and we had 2 new patrons join us. And shout out to Kim and Lauren.
You guys are our Valentines now.
Heyo.
Thanks for joining us. No, seriously, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Really exciting to get some new people on board. So we're stoked to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Spread the love. Tell your friends about Patreon and some of the extra stuff that we have on here. We got a pretty big backlog. We hope you guys have been enjoying it.
Yeah.
And now we're adding another cryptid to the fold of the backlog.
Exactly. So what are we talking about today, Andrew?
So this is one that I guess has been on the radar for a little while because it's been residing in a few books we've owned. And it's a strange but also just totally classic cryptid that's been around for quite a long time. And that's the Kongamato, which is similar in a lot of ways to some other sort of flying enigmas that we've loosely mentioned around the world, whether it be Papua New Guinea, different things like that. But for all intents and purposes, today we're talking about what is known as a large unknown flying creature from states of sub-Saharan Africa, possibly some sort of giant bat, a Jurassic era like pterosaur, which was of course a family of dinosaurs that were more commonly known for pterodactyls. But the natives of areas of northern Rhodesia, what is now modern-day Zambia specifically, they've got some pretty crazy stories to tell of essentially creatures big enough to take on full-size men, kill them, shred them apart, pick them up, carry them away. Legends of these creatures called the Kongamato, which translates to various different versions of overwhelmer of boats, and I'm air quoting here because there's a few different sort of versions of that, but all of them are very ominous and essentially speaking to the size of these creatures, which is definitely not something you would want to run into, that's for sure.
Yeah, like in my mind immediately, I'm like, what kind of boat are we talking about here? Are we talking about like, obviously it's more like a river system or, like the swamp.
Canoe-sized, smaller traveling vessels like on rivers.
Small motor run boat.
Right.
Like a river boat.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay.
Carrying however many passengers, but definitely something large enough to. And the weird thing is like with Mekele Mbembe, which you guys would all be familiar with from our non-Patreon episodes, similar kind of a name, would flip over boats, was known for that, like messing with people in the water systems between the Congo and Cameroon. It's a totally different thing when it's something that's flying. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Flying versus coming out of the water.
Exactly.
They both have their own elements of surprise for sure.
Right.
But it's a similar idea, though. The idea that this could be like a living dinosaur to a certain degree.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Well, yeah, potentially. I pulled a quote here from Nick Redfern, who we've mentioned before and quoted. He's a contributor for Mysterious Universe, and it speaks really well to this monster. So he has this to say: the name is a very apt one, since it had the habit of swooping down on canoes. There we go, specifically canoes, and savagely attacking and killing those using them. It was a huge beast that lived in and hunted in the Jiindu swamps and deeply terrified the people of this area, which there aren't a lot of them because this is a pretty uninhabited area, but there's definitely indigenous populations in the sort of the surrounding areas of the swamp. But it's a natural wetland that crosses over from, Zambia into a few other states as well. Super remote. Good for a place, something to hide. But maybe not necessarily a pterodactyl per se. But this was just sort of a good quote to reference how scary the beast is, I suppose you might say.
We get some confirmation on the type of boat.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, though. And I actually have a little bit of more of a nugget related to that overwhelming of boats scenario, but we'll get to that eventually.
You're
here.
going to save that? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it is kind of curious, though, because the origins of the actual legend, we don't really know how far back it actually goes because a lot of it is translated through oral tradition, right? And, you know, I'm sure we didn't come across it in this particular research, but this reminds me so much of, like, the Godzilla movie we just watched with, like, the firebird creature coming out of the mountain. You know what I mean? Obviously, that's so much larger, but it just has that same sort of a vibe to it. And when I was reading some of these articles, and I added this part in because we don't really know how far back this creature has been terrorizing the peoples of these states of sub-Saharan Africa. You know what I mean? Like it's become a little bit more modern in terms of like, you know, Christian missionaries asking about it and showing pictures of pterosaurs and pterodactyls. And then people being like, yeah, that looks like this. But that's a lot more modern. So it's kind of like hard to sort of pinpoint, you know what I mean? But specifically, we're dealing with tribes that are from landlocked states of Zambia, which is South Central Africa. These are Bantu-speaking peoples, which is the vast majority of the population of sort of these areas, northwestern regions of Zambia. Much, much smaller groups numerically than the ones living in the Congo, but there are some sort of genetic similarities with peoples living there. But yeah, Zambian woodland highlands average about 4,000 feet in elevation. So they're very, very remote regions where there's not a ton of people. There's a very small indigenous population still there. But these are the people that are encountering the Kongamato.
Yep, and they're keeping those stories kind of within their parameters too, you'd imagine. So when these outsiders come in the 20th and 19th centuries and all that, it does start to spread, but only to a certain sort of widespread sort of, you know,
right.
What am I trying to say? Radius?
It reaches
radius.
It gets to a few cryptozoologists, let's just say that.
That's exactly where we're heading with this. Let's get into a little bit more of a description of this creature. We've been kind of vague. We described it as flying, possibly a bat, possibly a pterosaur. To most, this thing did look like a bird, a really large bird. Some people compared it to an eagle, but this thing lacked feathers. It did not have anything remotely related to that. Instead, it had almost like a membrane or a tough, leathery skin that was red in color. And it almost made it appear as if it was some sort of giant bat or some sort of prehistoric creature.
It sounds like those wings, right? Like bat wings. Like when you say membranes, like membranous, that's totally what that sounds like. But of course, like pterodactyls as well. Like potentially lizards, I don't know.
I wonder, because like there's this whole debate between like, you know, like did dinosaurs have feathers? I wonder if this would include that as well.
Well, that's kind of funny, right? We're straddling that line. That line. Okay, yeah.
Indeed. Anyways, this, unlike a bat, it had a very massive gaping mouth or snout that was full of these razor sharp teeth. I wrote unlike a bat, but I'm now going to recant that because that definitely is not the case. A lot of bats do have teeth and they can look very vicious. They almost look like dogs, some of them, like the larger ones.
Yeah.
And possibly capable, well, this is the description of the Kongamato, going back to that, it was supposed to be a bat, capable of shredding a man in a matter of seconds. Boom. Just like in Kong Skull Island. Boom. Yeah. Throwing out another pop culture reference there.
They picked the guy up. They shred him apart pretty quick.
They did. It was like just like they just bit through his entire arm in just one go.
I suppose that would be a perfect reference to like a modern day. Obviously, that movie was like the 70s or whatever, right? That's what they're referencing. It's a modern day film, but the time period is the 70s.
Yeah.
And here are these creatures on this remote island.
Yeah, it's a very unique environment, protected by pervasive storms all the time kind of thing. Obviously, this isn't really the case in our story today, but you know, maybe similar in the idea that it is a very vast territory. There is a lot of, I don't know, like places that humans don't really want to go because it's not very fruitful for them to go searching for these things. But anyways, we're getting off topic already here. I want to get into a little bit of a quote from Adam over at the Pine Barrens Institute.
Sure.
Because he gets into more of like the specs on this thing. And so he says that the creature is reported to have a wingspan of 4 to 7 feet and a body length of about 4.5 feet. Possesses a long, thin tail and a narrow head that appears to form into a long beak that contains many sharp, small teeth. The skin looks like that of an amphibian or reptile, and the feet are reminiscent of a large eagle with talons on the end, while the wings closely resemble those of a bat. And it's depicted as gliding more than actually flying, which
is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. We can get into that a little bit here. So could this be a bat? Could it be some sort of weird, like, mammalian, like, flying squirrel thing?
It like, sort of sounds more like
I don't know. It's kind of weird. Like, the idea that it's not flapping its wings, so it's making these, like, very, like, dramatic swooping and diving motions towards its victims or the people that it's terrorizing, so to speak. I don't know.
But the interesting thing about that, I guess, is it will come down to this towards the end is, like, where it resides. You know what I mean? Like, if it's just a glider and it's going to take off from a higher point to be able to sort of like hunt and glide down, then its home in the swamps might not make as much sense, where you would definitely have to be like a flyer, right, in order to take off out of the swamp. Like when I'm picturing a pterodactyl in a swamp-like environment, it's going to be hard to take off. Like that would take a lot of energy, right? Like same as like a duck taking off out of the water. It's like, looks like it takes some effort.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
And then in order to also be able to shred a man. But this is where this comes in, because there's so many different sort of, not versions, I don't want to say that because that makes it sound like it's just a story, but different, very subtleties between the Kongamatos from Zambia, even all the way into Kenya, which isn't even a bordering state per se. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because it is interesting, because this does come up a lot. The idea of gliding, not flying, as if it's so large it can't even fly.
And you're hitting on something there with the whole idea that there are regional differences and there are regional names for this too.
Right.
But before we get into that, there were a couple other features here in the description, such as the idea that there is actually no reported speech or sounds that are coming from this creature at any point.
Weird.
That's strange to me.
Very strange.
Yeah, the idea that there's also an absence of any odors at all. There's not really, like, it's not skunk ape we're talking about here, even though we're talking about a very humid, swampy area.
Okay.
There was this guy, Robert Benjamin, who wrote about the Kongamato in his book, Unknown Creatures. And he described how local Africans were actually shown pictures, like you said, of these pterosaurs, pterodactyls, and that they immediately called it the Kongamato, while other prehistoric creatures shown to them did not elicit the same response, which in my mind was very similar to when we talked about Mokele and Mbembe, where it was like they knew exactly what it was out of the variations that were shown. It wasn't as if they were just led to be like, yes, this is it, and that's that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Anyways, I just thought that was interesting.
No, it really, yeah.
There's also this idea that we've already talked about here that it resides near these rivers. Is that because it hunts around there? Does it nest around there? I don't know.
If you believe it lives in the swamp, I guess you would say that it nests somewhere along the river systems, and that would be an optimal sort of hunting grounds for it.
Well, exactly. This idea that it very much, like the motions described in these accounts, very much reminded me of ospreys and other birds of prey that do hunt in the water. They fish. So, I don't know. I was thinking maybe that could be something that is
It's
distinct.
a possibility.
Yeah.
And no, you're right, actually.
Not that much bats do that, as far as I'm aware. They're mostly fruit eaters. They might be territorial.
The largest of bats are definitely like fruit eaters, right?
Yeah, or insects at most, kind of thing.
Right,
like
yeah,
for
like
other
they're
ones.
not going to attack a man. And
No.
Yeah, very, very strange.
They're not going to rip them to shreds instantly either. That's the thing.
It's so funny, though, how it's... Well, let's get into some of the different names, because the regional differences aren't that different. Let's just say that, which makes me believe that there's some sort of a species that people are witnessing. There might be these subtle variations across states, like in size, or it's a slightly less red, leathery skin. It's maybe a little bit more black in color. But then that's also, is like, are these creatures more nocturnal, or what time of day are people seeing them? Is it always this red, leathery color that just seems darker? Like,
it's the light affecting
similar,
the color.
You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. And to be honest, I don't really have much specifics other than the fact that there are different names for very similar creatures in places like the Cameroons and Ghana. And I don't even really want to try to pronounce these, but one is the Olitu.
Okay.
And another is Sasabonsa. That's the Ghana version. Cameroon's was the first one that I mentioned there.
Gotcha.
And it was supposedly Ivan T. Sanderson. He was more in the Cameroon region, if I'm not mistaken, when he had his own encounter with something very similar.
That's Mbembe territory too,
What we're
right?
talking about. Yeah, exactly. So very, very similar. What if there's more than one species of these prehistoric or Jurassic era things lurking around? Or perhaps it is bat. Yeah, we'll get into that.
You just keep always just throw that out there at the end of every sentence.
Maybe it's a bat.
Maybe it's a bat.
It could be an owl. Who knows?
You know, going back to McKelly, did we ever even get into anything in that episode about the idea of time slips or anything like that either? Because obviously we keep mentioning this idea of living dinosaurs, not as if we're dealing with a very strange, unidentified species of stork or crane or something like that.
Yeah.
That kind of comes up, but
I think we most hit on that when we talked about the northern tail from the Yukon. Oh, I'm not thinking of the Partridge Creek monster. That's it.
right.
Yeah.
So this name, I want to come back to this overwhelmer of boats. Because that reminds me a lot of the monster of Partridge Creek and the knocking over the boulders. It reminds me of Mekele and Mbembe. It reminds me of these types of monsters, dinosaurs,
Yeah.
giants, like, right? Like they're large beasts, you know what I mean? And it's known for, it's sort of supernatural in that sense that it can just be, because the description from Adam was of a much smaller bird to overwhelm a boat, you know what I mean? So this is,
Well, it doesn't take much to knock over a canoe.
yeah, I guess.
That was from Nick Redfern.
Yeah, also in the Adam description, you had a length and size as well that wasn't particularly gigantic.
Not gigantic, but when you add a wingspan, like that's pretty sizable.
Yeah. I suppose it would frighten you if you're in a canoe.
Yeah, it'd be startling.
In order to sort of like flap it over, I'm not really sure. It's like how
It
much
would be the
embellishment is
humans that are basically toppling the
scaring
boat.
themselves into flipping it over.
I would imagine, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, weren't just like indigenous accounts. Like we have obviously what we're going to go into right now, some European ones, and they started really early. Like the first one comes from 1923, and we love all the old European accounts. They're so fun, right? Because this was an era before, you know, I mean, we're still living in it. Like when we talk to Steve Elkins, like the era of great discovery is still upon us. But for a lot of things, especially animals, when we're losing the number of species we do every year, cryptozoology is such a golden egg, you know, of what can still be found.
Yeah. Definitely.
But this was the heyday, 1923. This was a guy named Frank Melland who, in, you know, typical fashion of the times, published a book called In Witch-Bound Africa. You guys can obviously know what I'm talking about there. 1923. But he spoke specifically of, quote, a huge flying animal with membranes on its wings instead of feathers, teeth in its mouth, generally red in color, and from 4 to 7 feet across. Speaking to the wingspan, I'm assuming, right? And he reported this back. He recorded it in this book, and it kind of caught wind a little bit in the United States. But he initially uncovered the Kongamato as part of research into the charm Muchi wa Kongamato, which was used by native travelers that was said to protect them in their boats from floods that were said to be caused by the monster. So much more of a supernatural element there, you know what I mean?
That's kind of where he started to piece together this Kongamato. Like, what is this overwhelmer? Like, what is this force you're talking about?
Right.
And then he got the description.
A very specific description, not just a god-like entity or something. It's like, no, this is a bird, essentially, that you don't want to run into.
A monster.
A beast. A flying beast.
Do you feel there's something in life that is getting in the way of your happiness or overall life goals? Perhaps it's time to try BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com is a professional online counseling service that assesses your needs and matches you with your own licensed professional therapist from the comfort of your home. BetterHelp is committed to you from the get-go, from finding a great therapeutic match to making it easy and free to change counselors if need be. BetterHelp.com is available on multiple platforms and across the globe, so you have the help you need wherever you find yourself. Best of all, BetterHelp.com is more affordable than traditional offline counseling, with financial aid available for those who qualify. We want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you get 10% off your first month by visiting BetterHelp.com/portal. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/portal.
Couple years later, there was a very highly acclaimed British journalist, newspaperman, 1925, by the name of G. Ward Price. And he happened to be friends with the Duke of Windsor, like the current Duke of Windsor at the time in 1925. He's referred to...
Or the future at that time.
Sorry, the future, rather. The future, the up-and-coming, a member of the family. And he had been traveling in Africa, writing, doing various different sort of like works and stuff as a botanist, as a biologist, and wrote about a bunch of different creatures, but they ended up like speaking to a few different people about some weird stuff that went on. So Mr. Price and the Duke of Windsor were on an official trip to what was Rhodesia at the time. That's just like Zambia now, right? On behalf of the crown. And they were only there for a little while, but there was a civil servant they spoke to who told them about a man who was wounded when he entered the swamp, when he entered the Giandu swamps, which is in northern Rhodesia, known to be the home of, quote, demons, according to the natives that they talked to. So, and this also comes up when we talk about Makele Mbembe, right? The word demon, that came up again. So is that sort of like a Christianization sort of layered over top of it, I guess, right?
It could be, potentially.
Also just the English version of something they were afraid of, I guess.
Yeah.
It all sort of aligns with that. But anyway, so the story goes that this man heads into the swamp, determined to essentially explore it, despite of the dangers that were spoken of there. And when he returned, he was on the verge of death from a massive gaping wound in his chest. And it was a pretty mysterious wound. People weren't exactly sure what would have caused it. But after a little bit of recovery, he recounted how a strange, huge bird with a long beak had attacked him in the swamp. And he relayed this to the civil servants, which then relayed it to the Duke of Windsor and Mr. Price. And when they showed this man a picture of a pterosaur in the makeshift hospital that he was in, he screamed in terror and basically ran out of the room. Same story that we just recounted a few paragraphs ago about people being shown the picture of a pterosaur and them screaming Kongamato.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
That's very intriguing.
This was relayed through
so how
to
did he
members
flee?
of the royal family.
How did he flee if he had a huge chest wound?
I mean, I guess in just sheer... I mean, I'm sure he didn't get very far. But I mean, if you have enough adrenaline and you're freaked out and you can jump out of the bed and run out of the room, probably.
That wasn't where it ended,
too keen
though.
on what he was seeing, right?
This is 1925. We're going to 3 years later. None other than Blaney Percival.
Blaney.
Anyways, 1920.
You think Blaney would be a good time at the bar?
Blaney, he must be. Percival, I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Well,
feel like it's two people in one with that name, eh? Those are two different personalities.
It's not a one name guy. You need both You need both
them
names.
both,
It's
yes.
a 2-name pony there, yeah.
And he's not just someone that's the life of the party. He's also an author. He did write this book known as The Game Ranger on Safari. He was a game warden, so this is a very fitting title for someone that wrote that book.
Indeed.
But it's around. You can get it online on auctions. There was one review. It described it as a, quote, systematic approach to examining various species of big game in Kenya colony. There are plenty of hunting episodes after rhinoceroses, buffalo, lion, and a plethora of antelope. Also, excellent chapters detailing the effect of human settlement, disease, drought, and war on game animals. Interesting. And so this is not just like something that's like a big tell-all, like something that's just like made up out of thin air kind of thing that's just, spouting out whatever kind of magic he wants to spout.
Totally.
I would take it more as it's like a manual. It's kind of more practical to a certain degree. Anyways, and it's a recount, obviously, of his time there. But he described how there were these nocturnal creatures that were leaving footprints. This is in and around villages. He actually was witness to some of these strange footprints. And I was kind of bummed to see no description offered of the footprints in what I could see. Obviously, I don't have a copy of this Game Ranger on Safari book, so I wish maybe he'll have more detail in there. But it wasn't described as talons or anything like that. It was just described as strange.
Right.
Anyways, besides that, he did ask the local Zambian people, known as the Kichu Wakamamba. Sorry, totally mispronounced that. Wakamaba. Sure.
Wakamaba.
That's a little bit closer, I guess.
Yeah, that's fun
But
to
they
say.
said that this was left by Makele Mbembe. I'm already confusing them. The Kongamato, okay.
You're spreading rumors, Amber.
I am spreading rumors.
Oh, the McKellar.
Oh, no, fake news. Anyways. But the Kitsu were also very consistent in their descriptions of this creature. And this was, obviously, we already said, recorded by people like Melland and others. And this was including the size, approximately, the appearance of the wings, the head, the color, the teeth, the mouth, the behaviors, all of it.
And yeah, and pretty uniform across the board so far.
Pretty uniform. We are going to jump a few years down the road again. We're doing the 1930s.
But we're coming back to a familiar
dirty
face.
30s, man.
The dirty 30s and a familiar face, a familiar friend that we've just recently mentioned.
Sanderson. Ivan T. Very same. And that was in our last episode covering...
the Minnesota Iceman, of course.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting case. But anyways, getting into this. So Sanderson found himself lead of a team.
So just to go, so sorry, we're throwing that out there, obviously we assume you guys have listened to the Minnesota Iceman episode, but
true.
Ivan T. Sanderson, American zoologist, also known as a cryptozoologist.
I guess, sorry, I should introduce.
He's a writer, and essentially he had shot a very large bat by the river in Zambia during this expedition, where he was the leader of the expedition in regards to cryptozoology.
I guess so.
There's a quote here that Amber's going to read. We pulled it from Adam Benedict's website from the Pine Barrens Institute, where Adam's done a very good job of collecting information on these types of strange accounts.
You're going to make me do this, Sanderson. Okay.
So here's what Sanderson had to say. Whenever you're ready there.
Quote, I looked. Then I let out a shout also and instantly bobbed down under the water because, coming straight at me only a few feet above the water, was a black thing the size of an eagle. I had only a glimpse of its face, yet that was quite sufficient, for its lower jaw hung open and bore a semicircle of pointed white teeth, set about their own width apart from each other. When I emerged, it was gone. George was facing the other way, blazing off his second barrel. I arrived, dripping on my rock, and we looked at each other. Will it come back? We chorused. Just before it became too dark to see, it came again, hurtling back down the river, its teeth chattering, the air swooshing as it was cleft by the great black Dracula-like wings.
Oh.
We were both off guard. My gun was unloaded, and the brute made straight for George. He ducked, and the animal soared over him, and it was at once swallowed up into the night. Unquote.
Interesting.
What do you make of that?
Pretty frightening encounter. And I immediately asked myself, when he says the size of an eagle, well, there's some big eagles out there. What size are you saying?
Like a golden eagle or something?
Well, I mean, obviously, the largest golden eagles. I mean, those things pick up mountain goats and fly away with them. Mm-hmm. They're huge.
He described Dracula-like wings, too. So that's another...
So, I mean, maybe...
And with the teeth, though. The teeth is more bat-like. And honestly, like, there were some people that suggested that the creature that attacked Sanderson was the mate of the bat that Sanderson had shot previously, like later or earlier that day.
Right.
Even though, like, yeah, obviously Sanderson, he's a zoologist. He would be able to recognize a lot of these things. Obviously, split second in the moment when something's attacking you, a little bit harder, I would imagine. But a lot of people say that he didn't recognize the creature. But I'll just say here that a quick note that Sanderson did recognize the creature as a bat, according to most accounts that I've read, but a previously unknown species or something that just really didn't belong.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously there's a pretty distinct difference between a bat with sort of, obviously compared to like the pterosaur or some of these other accounts, like a snub-nosed face versus a beak with teeth. Like that's full of teeth, but it's in a dog, more of a, like a mammal. It's not a long beak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know, that's just it for me. I'm like, I'm having a hard time picturing the snout per se. Like, is it like, because I've looked at things, we're going to get into some theories here of some specific types of bat, and they look very dog-like. They have like more of a muzzle. They're actually kind of cute, to be honest.
They're
not
super
ugly.
Cute.
They're all like these hammerhead bats, which supposedly that was one theory that came up too in relation to the bat hypothesis.
Right.
But the idea that is this thing a pterosaur or a pterodactyl in the sense that it has like almost like a pointed back of its head. You know what I mean? Like, what does the other features look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously hard to gauge because the sightings are fleeting. They're extremely remote. They get passed through the grapevine, and people are terrified when they happen. So it's hard to recount exactly what you see. And it seems like these things hunt in strange times, like where it's twilighty, it's either dark. It's hard to really make out if it is a bat or if it is something unidentified.
Or something else. The tail aspect too, like, you know, like there's supposed markings of the tail in the ground and all this stuff. There was one guy, Colonel, I want to say. Colonel Pittman, in 1942, reported stories that the natives told him of a large bat-like bird creature that lived in dense, swampy regions in northern Zambia, and that tracks of these creatures were seen with evidence of a tail dragging on the ground. So that's very interesting.
Tracks, again, like going back to what you were saying before, what exactly did these tracks look
like? Exactly. And that's why I couldn't like pull up an actual description of tracks. They just said tracks. So I'm like, well, what kind of tracks are we talking here?
See, and that came up again with Mekele and Bembe, but we had descriptions of the tracks. You know what I mean? Which I feel like is like more expected because it's a terrestrial, like rather than being a flying.
Yeah, you think they're perching on birds, or perching on branches, like
on
birds.
Trees made of birds, birds on birds on birds, perching on birds.
You don't really hear bats really like wandering around on the ground either.
No, and they also don't have tails.
That's a big one.
That sounds like. I mean, that sounds like more like the ones from our Thunderbirds episode talking about some of the ancient species that were not birds of flight, but that were essentially like descendants of the moas and ostriches and things like that were giant, you know,
landlocked birds.
Yeah, like, and just massive, which of course are African birds too, like ostriches and stuff. Like, you find those in Africa, don't you? Am I just throwing that out there totally randomly? I'm fairly certain that's a thing.
I don't know. I thought my head.
Not necessarily in the states we're looking at, but
don't know.
Well, I'm glad you found something from the 40s because that kind of like filled in the gap a bit because I'm jumping ahead through to the 1950s, the mid 1950s.
Okay.
And this was a report from a guy named JPF Brown, who claimed to see two creatures flying over a place called Fort Rosebery, and he was stationed there working as an engineer, and he wasn't really sure what to make of this. He just quote unquote called them creatures flying. Didn't say, you know, dinosaurs, didn't say whatever. Obviously it was unidentified, but it was around 6 p.m. So decent visibility, I guess, but depending on the time of year, this definitely would have been more like twilight. He did say in the end, though, that after he thought about it, the creatures did seem to be almost, quote unquote, prehistoric in appearance and shape, which is pretty interesting. Pulled this from a different website. It kind of went in more detail on Brown's account. He estimated later that the wingspan was about 3.5 feet. Not super, super big, right? But with a long, thin tail and then a long, narrow head with an elongated snout, like that of a dog, which sounds kind of weird. That's almost like halfway between the long beak of the pterosaur and then like the snub face of a bat. It's like the difference between like a pug and a Doberman, just for people out there trying to picture it in their head. Like that's how I'm thinking to myself, right?
Yeah.
Like a more elongated snout versus like a bat, like more snub face.
Yeah, or like a beak versus a snout.
Exactly. Because he goes, like, I don't know, it goes on even further here. Like, after his initial report was released, there was a couple in the area, Mr. and Mrs. D. Gregor. I wasn't able to actually verify these two people, just so you guys know. But they ended up reporting that they had seen the same two pair of long, quote, flying lizards in southern Rhodesia, which would now be modern-day Zambia. Another witness, right in around the same time, Dr. J. Blake Thompson, also reported that natives of the area of the Awimba tribe, also in Zambia, had told him about huge flying creatures. So we have these huge flying creatures, but we're talking about 2.5 feet long and 3.5 foot long wingspans, but resembling that of rats that would attack humans, and that they lived in the caves and cliffs near the Great Zambezi River. That sounds a lot like bats to me.
Yeah, it does sound like bats. Rats, bats,
mammals living in caves, but these are also scary bats that want to attack people. Are they like rabid bats that are the cause of the Kongamato sightings in some of these places? Like, what is going on here?
Is it a product of people just wandering into territory where they are not welcome? You know, like
possibly
roost territory, that type of thing. Like fruit bats live in trees too, like things like that. So yeah,
right.
I would think.
This was obviously just a very brief sighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a few months later, though, in 1957, things got a little more extreme. It wasn't just a sighting. There was a pretty serious attack from something completely unexplained. And we pulled this again from Adam's work over at the Pine Barrens Institute. Go check it out if you guys haven't already. But this is from 1957, where there was a patient on the verge of death admitted to a hospital at Fort Rosenberry. This is sort of similar to the same one. A wound on the chest, scratches all over the body. Hospital staff asked him what attacked him, and he described a large bird-like creature with a long beak, and huge wings. The attending staff then asked the man if he could draw the animal for better identification, but when he produced the drawing of an animal resembling a pterosaur, flying reptiles from the Triassic to the late Cretaceous period, this is from Adam's article, quote-unquote, a servant brought a book to the hospital containing images again of the prehistoric animals, and he recognized them as the creature he had seen.
Interesting.
Now, there's a chance that this is actually the same story that I recounted earlier.
I have a feeling
very similar.
Yeah, me too. I kind of had that thought. I was
it's similar, but it's minus the scratches, and I mean, it's the same general location, right? Like in Zambia, Fort Rosebery, which was like a pretty prominent location. Like I did look into that. There was a lot of kind of comings and goings with people in that area there.
But the idea that too, like that he was shown this picture, had shown a picture of this kind of thing, and then he runs out in a screaming panic, like that's just classic urban legend territory.
Exactly,
right,
that's what I was going to say. Like it speaks to the melding of like oral tradition, urban legend, folklore of creatures that people are afraid of in the swamps that could easily just be bats. That are unidentified, which is still interesting in and of itself.
Bats can be very terrifying to regular folk, you know?
People are afraid of them.
Yeah.
Ace Ventura was afraid of bats.
Ace Ventura, yeah, case in point.
But I mean, we lose sight, I think, of cryptozoology being interesting in and of itself with just like things that aren't necessarily like living dinosaurs, but that are still undiscovered. Like, would you be less interested in this story of the Kongamato if we knew definitively there were no living pterosaurs, New Guinea, anywhere? We're not talking the Ahul today. There's a million other ones.
Well, it's just a more mundane creature that just hasn't been identified.
Right.
And it's a subspecies of something that is similarly existing in other parts of the world. And I see what you mean. Like the idea, there's this melding of cryptozoology and the idea of like these supernatural elements tied to these creatures. Like even with something like the death worm, like, you know, like, oh, it can shoot like venom or electricity out of it kind of thing. Like that's kind of a crazy supernatural element. If this is literally just an unknown creature that we just haven't pegged down with a name yet, you know what I mean? Like, becomes less fantastical, but not less interesting to me.
No, definitely not less interesting. And then on the flip side too, I guess finding the new species of the quote unquote, your quote unquote, more mundane creatures lends credence to the potential of the other discoveries too.
Like the coelacanth.
Yeah, like we always come back to that, or the wood bison or whatever I always bring up all the time, and different things like that. Do you want to jump ahead a little bit here to the 1980s?
Yeah,
Getting
let's do it.
a little bit more modern here.
Huh.
We wanted to talk about Roy Mackal, who we've mentioned before. I had him confused, though, when I threw this out to you earlier today. I was like, was that the same guy we mentioned from the Death Worms episode? It actually wasn't. That was Ivan Mackerlee,
who
was a Czech cryptozoologist, whereas Roy Mackal is a biologist from the University of Chicago. And he became interested in this story after there was a whole bunch of these European reports. There was a couple of Americans who had actually gone into Zambia to look for this creature as well. But he got really interested. He ended up traveling to the area that of the latest interest in the sightings, which was Nambia, which does border Zambia just by a sliver, because Nambia actually is not landlocked, unlike some of these other states we've been talking about. So he goes there, traveling through some of these swampy areas that do border Zambia. But like many others, all he essentially did was collect literally a ton, like binders full in some of these references I talked to, of so many different people claiming that, oh, their grandma saw this, their uncle got attacked by this, right? Their brother-in-law saw the Kongamato here. But it's all just secondhand verbal oral accounts, right? He didn't actually see it himself. So he ends up going home. But then it kind of sucked for him because as the story goes, and we pulled this from Cryptozoology A to Z, the Lauren Coleman book, he had a colleague there with him who stayed over into the following year, into 89. His name was James Cossey, or Cossey, Kosi. And he reported that he actually witnessed one of these birds, if you want to call them that, one of these creatures.
Yeah.
Massive, black, gliding, unidentified flying entity with white markings on the wings.
That's kind of
It seemed to be
unique.
traveling between the hilltops. So whether it was a glider or a flyer, if you want to go back to that gliding thing we mentioned earlier, clearly not living in the swamps on the ground, but gliding in and amongst the hilltops of some of the more mountainous regions of Namibia, which I have never been. But anyway.
The white part is kind of interesting because we don't hear any of that in other reports.
No.
So that's kind of a unique feature. The gliding again, yeah, that's kind of consistent with Adam's earlier descriptions and things of that nature too. So
Right.
I don't know. Was there a reflection? Was the moon kind of reflecting off it? So where could this Kongamato reside possibly? Where is this supposed home of the beast?
If we believe it exists, it has to reside somewhere.
We have obviously a general idea as far as the regions and things of that nature, but let's get into some of these like specifics, like the Jiandu swamps, for example, also known as the Bangwulu wetlands. And this is an ecosystem that's adjacent to a predominant lake in northeastern Zambia. And it covers about 10,000 square kilometers.
Pretty massive. Yeah.
In a region that's predominantly made of floodplains, grasslands, woodlands that are seasonally flooded, and permanent swamps that are fed by there's about 4 very predominant rivers that feed this area. So could the Kongamato hide in trees? Could it live like a crane? Could it live in the roosts of these, like really like, you know, like I'm picturing in wetlands like such as this, there's a lot of old growth going on here.
Yeah.
Lots of places that have been around for a long time. Could there be like almost like, I'm picturing, you know, I don't know if you ever read these books, Silverwing, it was a series and it was Scholastic. It was a kid series. You read it when you're like in grade 6 or something.
Sure, yeah.
And I just remember thinking it was amazing because like Silverwing was like this cute little bat, whatever, and it follows him throughout all these different like Sunwing and whatever. There's a whole series of these things, but they live in this giant old tree, all of them, and until it burns in one book. But anyways, I just thought that was like, you know, like this could be very much like that. Or like, you know, even in The Lion King, we have Rafiki living in that tree. That's pretty gnarly. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of crazy stuff happening around there. And like, where we live is a very conservative landscape, I'll say. So there's a lot of wild going on.
No, definitely. And the way it's described and a lot of the things we've talked about today make it sound as if, yeah, it's fishing in swamps. It's attacking indigenous peoples that are around the swamp that just happen to be either fishing or just in the area. Like it's not swooping down from hilltops in most accounts, other than literally the last one we just gave. Unless you're talking about some of the accounts in neighboring states, which happen to actually be a lot more menacing, really, because Mount Kenya is actually even one of the possible locations or homes or, you know, origin points of the Kongamato, or at least creatures like it. But Kenya is a fair ways away from Zambia. It definitely doesn't border Zambia. You know, it's a hop, skip, and a jump states-wise in Africa. But it's believed that, yeah, Kongamato descends from Mount Kenya as a death omen. And
Really?
it's called something different there. The Batamzinga. Said to eat decomposing human flesh and even in some cases be digging up corpses.
That sounds like a vulture.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, digging them up, I don't even know. Like that's
Even the idea of it being a death omen, like vultures are very much associated with death in a lot of cultures.
Oh, absolutely. No, for sure. I mean, and yeah, there's various different indigenous groups around this area of the mountain that believe that it flies to the ground nightly from the top of Mount Kenya, sort of a nightly feeding ritual, if you will. So that is a lot more lore-like, you know, paranormal, like the creature from Godzilla that I mentioned earlier in the episode, right?
Yeah.
Descending from the mountaintop.
Not quite as epic per se, but definitely, yeah, along those lines.
Totally. And Mount Kenya is, of course, a massive, massive mountain. Kilimanjaro is larger, the largest on the continent. And this is, another place that's said to be a potential location of the creature. One man had actually seen the Kongamato in flight close by Kilimanjaro, apparently, at nighttime specifically. But this is just such an unidentifiable case. It's like there's so many different things you can see flying at night that look to be like a flying lizard. You know what I mean? Like a prehistoric entity of some
Interesting.
kind. So I'm leaning a little bit more towards a bat.
The bat,
and I think that's where you're leaning as well. And you've got a little bit more to say on that.
More so because of the membranous sort of features of the wings and that type of thing. Distinct lack of feathers. The snout, again, kind of is loosely aligned with that too. There were some bats that we looked into that definitely could be in the range that we're talking about. So things like the giant golden crown flying fox, which is one of the largest bat species in the world and among the heaviest as well. This is a likely culprit. The habitat area, loosely, not loosely. This is a very loose. Like, this thing's known to kind of be more around the Southeast Asian region, Papua New Guinea, Australia, those types of things. So Papua New Guinea is off the coast of Africa, so maybe they could make the leap over there.
Possibly.
The only thing that really bothers me about this, like, the physical descriptors are pretty closely matched, but the eating/hunting habits of these things is very different. The idea that it primarily feeds on flowers, nectar, fruits, non-carnivorous in nature, not to say that it couldn't perhaps be like defending its territory in some cases, but definitely not the type of predator that's going to like shred a human in a single go.
No.
The behaviors don't match up to me, which really does bother me. There was actually this YouTube video, we can put this in our notes, I guess, but of a U.S. military personnel that captured and hung up this giant bat that could be a flying fox if real. This thing is massive. So if you look at it, you can even just Google it yourself and it'll probably pop up. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where closely aligned, but behaviors, iffy, kind of.
Right.
Perhaps.
I'm sort of, and I'm agreeing with you there, unless it's just, it's not only an unidentified species, but an unidentified everything, like all the behaviorology, like everything behind, like it just wouldn't make sense necessarily, right? It sounds much more aggressive. It sounds territorial. It sounds like a pterosaur. At least how they're portrayed in film and in things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, pop culture reference.
But, of course, they were said to have disappeared 65 million years ago, lasting barely into the Cretaceous, but they were massive, of course, flying reptiles that look exactly like a lot of the descriptions of the Kongamato. But I don't know. I mean, like, the majority of these fossils have been found in like marine deposits, things like that. They were definitely fish eaters. So more coastal marine areas, right? Less inland regions, which is another sort of interesting thing because we're talking about landlocked inland swamps. But of course, if these creatures were still alive today and they were fishing on the coasts, then we would see them. Or if there was versions of them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, going back to one of our very earliest references, was it the Melland account of 23?
Yeah.
And George Melland, was it?
I think so.
And he was saying, or it wasn't him, but it was someone later on that was basically kind of trying to say that fossils that had been found in the area that resembled pterosaurs and things like that were influencing the local populations to say that it was a pterosaur.
Interesting,
when they were actually,
really?
I don't know why I just thought of that right now, but the idea that if there were fossils found in that kind of area in that time, it was the era of dinosaurs and all that craziness going on too, like, or just getting past the heydays of all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, it does closely match behaviorally and obviously descriptorally, if that makes sense. The description matches, but the time frame does not.
Right.
Yeah.
Misidentified birds is kind of what I'm leaning towards too, right? Because like we talked about, bat doesn't necessarily match up other than description. There's two specific species that live in these sort of swampy areas of Zambia specifically that could fit the bill. The shoe, pun intended, the shoe-bill stork is one of them, which is a very, very large, dark-colored feathered bird, 8-foot wingspan. It kind of has a prehistoric appearance to it, to be totally honest with you. And they've become pretty rare. So you're not going to run into them all the time. So it would make sense if someone encountered it, it might sort of freak them out. But there's absolutely no evidence of the shoebill stork behaving aggressively at all towards humans. It also doesn't look membranous at all. It doesn't have teeth. all of these things, right?
Yeah.
There's another one.
A lot of missing
The
stuff.
saddle-billed stork. So another one in the area. They have an 8.5-foot wingspan, a very, very long, bright red bill. That's sort of, and a horizontal black stripe from tip to tip. Not the description.
But there's
at all
wings and there's feathers and there's like, you know what I mean?
It's essentially just
And
the
long
size.
feet.
It's really just the size. So I can see something appearing membranous if it's wet and it's
it wouldn't be
not
able
the
to
right
fly.
time of day. Well, no, sure, why not? I mean, birds dive in the water and pick stuff up and fly away. They're wet on the outside.
You can tell, though. You can tell.
Oh, yeah, okay. There's Steve
You
Irwin.
can
You can tell.
tell.
You can tell.
Come on.
I guess we got to go to Zambia.
They got birds around there. You can tell a bird from a bat. No?
An 8.5-foot wingspan bird? Yeah, you can tell a bird from a bat. But
Yeah.
you're just saying, yeah.
Generally, like if I was looking at a crane in the sky, I can tell that it's a crane. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm just writing this off too.
Context matters, and it's hard to say, I think, a lot of the time. But those are two pretty... I mean, those are really the only examples I could find where like it's going to be big and it's there, and you could mistake it for something.
It's big. It's there. Buy it.
It isn't.
It's a great sales pitch.
But they're not going to gut a man's chest. They're not.
No.
They're not going to do anything.
They don't have teeth either, as far as I'm aware.
No. So, in the end, we're left with this question: does the Kongamato exist? And if it does exist, on Into the Portal, you guys know that comes in sort of a spectrum of existence in our world physically as a cryptozoological entity that's yet to be discovered, or does it exist in the sense that it can be seen at certain times in certain places, and maybe it does attack things or, have
Leaves
run-ins with people,
traces.
leaves traces, but isn't necessarily from this time or this place per se.
Well, exactly. So it's the idea of like a time slip kind of, right? Like, are we experiencing something like that with a creature such as this?
I think that's honestly where I'm kind of leaning, because other than the massive Christian overlay, that lens, and people either wanting to believe that there's still living dinosaurs because they don't actually go back as far as people think. You know what I mean? And that's a big thing with Christian missionaries in Central Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to these types of stories. That came up in Mekele and Mbembe a lot. You know what I mean? I don't know what to make of it, though, because people seem pretty genuine in what they're seeing. Some of it's got to be misinterpreted, but I'm leaning towards it's not a bat, it's not the shoebill stork. People are seeing something weird. I just don't think it's a pterosaur in the now.
No.
Per se.
Okay. That's interesting. Because, you would think there would have to be quite a big population to sustain themselves, potentially. That's what my immediate thought was, at least.
Right.
Then we get down to the population sizes. All these sorts of things. But we want to know what you think.
Yeah.
Are you leaning towards bat? Are you leaning towards pterosaur? Are you leaning towards something else? We want to know. Or nothing altogether. Do you think this is complete?
Nothing altogether. Cautionary tale, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. What if it's just culturally ingrained? It's a spirit that we've now interpreted as some sort of actual living creature that we've literally manifested into our own reality without any help from anyone but ourselves. Who knows? Let us know.
That was a mouthful. Just internalize all that, you guys, and then leave a comment below. Yeah, we really do want to hear what you guys have to say about this and just about cryptozoology in general. I mean, are we even getting remotely close to figuring out if something like this exists? Because until we find a body, really, it always comes down to that,
classic
right? It always comes
problem.
down to that. Same with Sasquatch, same with them all. But it is fun to talk about, though. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back hanging out with you guys again pretty soon here on Patreon. So until next time, on Into the Portal.
Your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.